A horsebus, a horse-drawn omnibus, was a large, enclosed and sprung horse-drawn vehicle used for passenger transport before the introduction of motor vehicles. It was mainly used in the late 19th century in both the United States and Europe, and was one of the most common means of transportation in cities. In a typical arrangement, two wooden benches along the sides of the passenger cabin held several sitting passengers facing each other. The driver sat on a separate, front-facing bench, typically in an elevated position outside the passenger's enclosed cabin. In the main age of horse buses, many of them were double-decker buses. On the upper deck, which was uncovered, the longitudinal benches were arranged back-to-back. Similar, if smaller, vehicles were often maintained at country houses to convey servants and luggage to and from the railway station. Especially popular around 1870 to 1900, these vehicles were known as private omnibuses or station buses, coachman-driven. They would usually accommodate 4 to 6 passengers inside, with room for luggage on the roof. A small opened wagon with or without a top, but with an arrangement of the seats similar to horse-drawn omnibuses, was called a wagonette. Etymology: bus is a clipped form of the Latin word omnibus. A legend promoted by the French Transportations Museum website says the name is derived from a hatter's shop of the Omnis family in front of the first station opened in Nantes by Stanislas Baudry in 1823. Omnis omnibus was a pun on the Latin-sounding name of the theatre omnis, omnis meaning all, and omnibus meaning for all in Latin. Thence, the legend concludes, Nantes citizens gave the nickname of omnibus to the vehicle, though it is undisputed that the term arose with Stanislas Baudry's company. There is however no record of any omnis hatter living in that street. In 1892, the son of Baudry's bookkeeper wrote in the Bulletin de la Société Archéologique de Nantes that omnibus had a simpler origin. Baudry used to call his horse cars dames blanches, a name which critics told him made no sense. He then replied, with the Latin word, then, these are omnibus cars. The name caught up immediately. Other stories about the name origin quickly spread out. The term omnibuses carried over to motor vehicles. The 1914 book Motor Body Building in All Its Branches, by Christopher William Terry, described an omnibus as having longitudinal seats in rows with either a rear door or side doors. History of omnibus services. The first known public bus line was launched by Blaise Pascal in 1662 and was quite popular until fares were increased and access to the service was restricted to high society members by regulation. Services ceased after 15 years. The Paris omnibus was started in 1828 by a businessman named Stanislas Baudry, who had begun the first French omnibus line in Nantes in 1826, using 2 spring-suspended carriages, each for 16 passengers. The name was said to come from the station of the first line in Nantes, in front of the store of a hatmaker named Omnis, who had a large sign on his building saying, Omnis Omnibus. Following success in Nantes, Baudry moved to Paris and founded the enterprise des Omnibus on Rue de Alencar, with workshops on the Quai de Gemapes. In 1827 he commissioned an English coachmaker, George Schillebeer, to design a vehicle that could be stable and carry a large number of passengers. Schillebeer's design worked. On the 28th of April 1828, the first Paris omnibus began service, running every 15 minutes between La Madeleine and La Bastille. Before long, there were 100 omnibuses in service, with 18 different itineraries. A journey cost 25 centimes. The omnibus circulated between 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening. Each omnibus could carry between 12 and 18 passengers. The busiest line was that along the Grand Boulevards. It ran from 8 in the morning until midnight. The Paris omnibus service was an immediate popular success, with more than 2.5 million passengers in the first 6 months. However, there was no reliable way to collect in money from the passengers. All the fare collectors kept much of the money for themselves. In its first years, the company was continually on the verge of bankruptcy, and in despair, Baudry committed suicide in February 1830. Baudry's partners reorganized the company and managed to keep it in business. In September 1828, a competing company, Les Dames Blanches, had started running its own vehicles. In 1829 and the following years, more companies with poetic names entered the business: Les Citadines, Les Tricycles, Les Orléanaises, Les Diligents, Les Écossaises, Les Bayonnaises, Les Carolines, Les Batignolles, Les Parisiennes, Les Hirondelles, Les Josephines, Les Excellents, Les Sylphides, Les Constantines, Les Dames Françaises, Les Algériennes, Les Dames Réunies, and Les Gazelles. The omnibus had a profound effect on Parisian life, making it possible for Parisians to work and have a social life outside their own neighborhoods. By 1845, there were 13 companies in Paris operating 23 omnibus lines. In 1855, Napoleon III had them combined into a single company, the Compagnie Générale des Omnibus, with a monopoly on Paris public transportation. Beginning in 1873, they were gradually replaced by tramways, and, beginning in 1906, by the omnibus automobile, or motorbus. The last horse-drawn Paris omnibus ran on the 11th of January 1913, from Saint-Sulpice to La Villette. Shillabere built another bus for the Quaker Newington Academy for girls near London. This had a total of 25 seats, and entered history as the first school bus. Shillabere saw the success of the Paris omnibus in service and concluded that operating similar vehicles in London, for the fare-paying public with multiple stops, would be a paying enterprise. So he returned to his native city. His first London omnibus, using the same design and name as the Paris vehicle, took up service on the 4th of July 1829 on the route between Paddington and Bank, via the New Road, Somers Town and City Road. 4 services were provided in each direction daily. Shillabere's success prompted many competitors to enter the market, and for a time buses were referred to as Shillabere's. Horse buses were chiefly used from the 1820s until the early 20th century. In Britain, John Greenwood opened the first bus line in Britain in Manchester in 1824. His pioneering idea was to offer a service where, unlike with a stagecoach, no prior booking was necessary and the driver would pick up or set down passengers anywhere on request. The public transport system of Berlin is the oldest one in Germany. In 1825, the first bus line from Brandenburg to Charlottenburg was opened by Simon Kremser, running to a timetable. The first bus service inside the city operated from 1840 between Alexanderplatz and Potsdamer Bahnhof. It was run by Israel Moses Henoch, who had organized the cab service since 1815. On January 1, 1847, the Concessionäre Berliner Omnibus Compagnie started its first horse bus line. The growing market experienced the launch of numerous additional companies, with 36 bus companies in Berlin by 1864. Bus services in Paris were relaunched in 1828 by Stanislas Baudry. Buses have been used on the streets of London since 1829, when George Schiller Beer started operating his horse-drawn omnibus service from Paddington to the City of London. In 1850 Thomas Stilling started Horsebus services, and in 1855 the London General Omnibus Company, or LGOC, was founded to amalgamate and regulate the horse-drawn omnibus services then operating in London. For the end of the 1820s, the first horse-drawn omnibuses ran in the streets of New York City. Horses pulling buses could only work for limited hours per day, had to be housed, groomed, fed and cared for every day, and produced large amounts of manure, which the omnibus company had to store and dispose of. Since a typical horse pulled a bus for 4 or 5 hours per day, covering about a dozen miles, many systems needed 10 or more horses in stable for each bus. With the advent of mass-produced steel, horse buses were put on rails as the same horse could then move 3 to 10 times as many people. This was not only more efficient but faster and produced, in an age of unpaved streets, a far superior ride. These horse cars on rails were, in the larger cities, converted to cable-drawn cars, as still exist in San Francisco, the cable being drawn by stationary steam engines. At around 1890, electric propulsion became practical and replaced both the horse and the cable, and the number of traction lines on rails expanded exponentially. These became known as streetcars, trams, trolleys, and still exist in many cities today, though often having been replaced by the less infrastructure-intensive motorbuses driven by an internal combustion engine. For the beginning of the 20th century, the remaining horse buses which had not been converted to rail began to be replaced by petrol-driven motorbuses, or autobuses. The last recorded horse omnibus in London was a Tilling bus which last ran between Peckham and Honor Oak Tavern, on the 4th of August 1914. The last Berlin horse omnibus ran on the 25th of August 1923. Some horse buses remain in use today for tourist sightseeing tours. Bibliography. Fierro, Alfred. Histoire et Dictionnaire de Paris. Robert Laffont. ISBN 2-221-07862-4. Acutard Owen de Villefos, René. Histoire de Paris. Bernard Grasset.